You know what? Nobody tells you about getting rich. The moment you are supposed to act is the exact moment every cell in your body is screaming at you to run. March 2009. A school teacher named Margaret is staring at her savings account. $50,000, 5 years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and saying no to her kids when they wanted the expensive sneakers. That money was supposed to be a down payment on a house. The S&P 500 had just closed at 676 points. Lehman Brothers was a smoking crater. Retirement accounts had been cut in half. The headlines weren't predicting recovery. They were predicting the end of capitalism as we knew it. And she took that $50,000 and bought an index fund. Not from picking the right stock, not from insider information, not from timing the bottom perfectly, from doing the one thing that felt completely insane, when everyone around her was doing the smart thing. You want to know what the smart people did. They waited. They waited for stability. They waited for confirmation. They waited for the fear to pass, and the experts to give the all-clear signal. And by the time they felt safe enough to invest, Margaret had already captured the entire recovery. This is the lie you have been sold about wealth, that it comes from being careful, from waiting for the right moment, from doing what everyone else is doing. Because surely, all those people can't be wrong. Except they are wrong, catastrophically wrong, and the data proves it. Between 2010 and 2024, the United States added 15 million new millionaire households. That is the entire population of the New York metro area, crossing the $1 million threshold in 14 years. Who were these people? Not hedge fund managers, not tech executives with stock options. The vast majority were teachers, nurses, accountants, and small business owners, who kept investing through their 401ks, while everyone else was being smart. In 2024 alone, the U.S. added 379,000 new millionaires. That is more than 1,000 people becoming millionaires every single day. Not from winning the lottery, not from inheritance, from participating in markets while everyone else was waiting for permission. The moment that feels dangerous is the moment that pays. And right now, while you are reading this, another moment is unfolding. Not a market crash, something bigger. Something that makes 2009 look like a practice run. $124 trillion is changing hands over the next 2 decades. Not million, not billion, trillion with a T. That is more money than the entire annual economic output of every country on Earth combined. It is wealth accumulated over 8 decades of American expansion, about to cascade through generations. And just like in 2009, most people have no idea it is happening. They're waiting for clarity, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to tell them it is safe. Meanwhile, the people who understand what Margaret understood are already positioning themselves. Baby boomers control 52% of all wealth in the United States right now. The youngest boomers turned 62 this year, the oldest are approaching 80. That is roughly $78 trillion concentrated in a single generation. That is beginning to age out. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is demographic inevitability. The money is moving whether you participate or not. What would you have done in March 2009? Would you have been Margaret, or would you have been everyone else? Because whatever your answer is, that is exactly what you're doing right now. Here is a number that should make you physically uncomfortable. 62% of the $124 trillion about to change hands in this country will flow from households that represent just 2% of the population. 2 out of every 100 families will absorb nearly 2/3 of the largest wealth event in modern history. If you are not in that 2%, and statistically you are not, then sitting around waiting for a check from a dead relative is the financial equivalent of buying a single lottery ticket and calling it a retirement plan. Think about what $124 trillion actually looks like in motion. During the pandemic, the entire government relief effort came to about $5 trillion, and that single injection rewired consumer behavior, inflated housing prices, and sent markets on a run. That minted a whole new class of accidental millionaires. The wealth transfer is 25 times that figure, not arriving in a single stimulus burst, but rolling through the economy year after year for 2 decades straight. Gen X alone stands to absorb roughly $1.4 trillion per year over the next 10 years. Picture that every 12 months. A forgotten generation caught between aging parents and college tuition bills receives a capital injection larger than the GDP of most countries. Millennials face a longer wait but a far heavier payload. Approximately $46 trillion is heading their way, arriving right as many hit their peak earning years. Inherited capital stacking on top of career income does not add, it multiplies. Now here is where the cold math gets interesting. That $50,000 Margaret dropped into an S&P 500 index fund on the 9th of March 2009, the day the market bottomed at 676 points. It is worth roughly $590,000 today. No stock picks, no insider knowledge, no genius. Just one person who recognized that a massive wave of capital was about to flood into a market where everyone else had already run for the exits. The conditions rhyme. In 2009, three things lined up. Assets were cheap, a wall of money was incoming, and fear had cleared the field. Today, the mechanism is different, but the architecture is identical. The wall of money is not coming from the Federal Reserve. It is coming from the wealthiest generation that ever lived, liquidating and passing down $124 trillion in assets. The last time anything structurally comparable happened was after World War II, when the GI Bill sent millions of returning soldiers into homes, businesses, and equity markets all at once. That single event built the American middle class and produced the very generation now handing their wealth down. History is not just rhyming here. It is running the same play at 25 times the budget. So before we get into what actually positions you on the right side of this, ask yourself honestly, when $1.4 trillion a year starts flowing through the economy you live in, do you have a single thing in place to catch even a sliver of it? When trillions pour into investment accounts, asset prices inflate, stocks rise, real estate appreciates, business valuations surge. Sounds democratic, right? Except there is a filter. You only benefit if you already own assets when the money moves. If you're sitting in cash, waiting for stability, watching from the sidelines because you're scared, or because you think you need to understand everything first, you're not participating in the wealth transfer, you're funding it. Every dollar that flows into the market pushes prices higher. Every heir who buys a home with inherited capital makes your rent more expensive and homeownership more distant. The rising tide doesn't lift all boats. It lifts the boats already in the water. If you're standing on the shore, you just watch the waterline rise. The data makes this brutally clear. 72% of investors between 21 and 43 are done with old playbooks. Traditional stocks and bonds, they just don't believe those can deliver above average returns. Their parents built wealth buying blue-chip stocks and holding bonds. That playbook is dying, and everyone pretending otherwise is lying to themselves. The capital is redirecting. Artificial intelligence infrastructure, clean energy, healthcare innovation, digital assets. If your portfolio looks like your parents' portfolio, you're positioned for their economy, not yours. The $124 trillion isn't flowing into what worked in 1985. It is flowing into what younger investors think might still work in 2045. Geography is the other blade in this whole mess. Real estate appreciation since 2000 averages 150%, which sounds impressive. But that number is meaningless. Austin and Cleveland both lived through that period. The same $500,000 in each city produce completely different outcomes. Markets attracting young workers and technology exploded. Markets losing people just stagnated or declined. Heirs aren't buying homes in the sleepy suburbs where their parents retired. They're buying in cities where jobs, culture, and noise concentrate. Inherited properties in retirement destinations will quietly flood the market. Demand in urban centers, that pressure cooker, is only going to intensify. Margaret didn't need a PhD in finance to make this work. She needed two things: capital to deploy and the discipline to stay invested. Someone who put $500 monthly into an S&P index fund in 2009. By early 2026, they ended up with over $250,000. Not from genius, from boring, relentless consistency. But that journey came with every kind of panic you can imagine. The European debt crisis, the government shutdown, the trade war, the pandemic crash. then the 2022 bear market just for good measure. At every moment, headlines screamed the rally was over. Again. At every moment, people fled to safety and politely missed the recovery. The market crossed 2,000 in 2014, then 3,000 in 2019, then 5,000 in early 2024, then 6,000 later that year, then 7,000 in January 2026. While everyone complained it felt terrible. It never felt like a golden age while it was happening. It felt like constant crisis. The people who stayed invested accumulated wealth. The people waiting for certainty missed the train. You know what happens when you miss the 10 best trading days? Your annual return drops from 17% to 12%, like a quiet tax on hesitation. Miss 25 days and you cut your gains nearly in half. Those days don't announce themselves. They show up during crashes and panic, exactly when your hands are shaking, and every headline swears the world is ending. The people who captured those days weren't braver or smarter than you. They just already had money sitting in the market when fear spiked. That is the only difference that actually mattered. They were there while everyone else was refreshing news feeds. $500 every month automatically into a diversified index fund. That is it. That is the entire mechanical action hiding behind all the noise. You're not picking stocks, you're not timing entries or pretending to read charts. You're not following gurus or waiting for the perfect cosmic moment. You set up an automatic transfer from checking on the first, then forget it. Over 25 years, roughly the length of this wealth transfer, the math adds up. That is $150,000 in straight contributions. At 10% annual returns, the historical stock market ballpark. That becomes around $665,000. At a more conservative 7%, it still becomes about $450,000. But here is where the transfer quietly changes the math. If growth runs just 1 point higher because 124 trillion floods into assets, that 7% becomes 8, and the compounding quietly explodes. Bump your monthly contribution to $1,000 as your career grows. Suddenly, the 10% scenario gives you roughly $1.33 million. Regular people become millionaires through nothing but consistency. No genius required, no special risk tolerance badge, no market timing trophy. Just the same boring transfer, every single month, for 25 years. You don't need to understand every reason it works. You just need to be in the market when it does. The professions that ride this transfer are already expanding. Financial planning, estate administration, wealth management, tax advisory, real estate transactions. Millennial and Gen Z clients at high net worth firms jumped from 8% to 25% by 2024. The next generation isn't coming, it is already in the waiting room. The spousal transfer dynamic adds another layer the brochures barely mention. $54 trillion will pass to surviving spouses before it ever reaches kids or charities. About $40 trillion of that flows to widowed women. That creates a massive market for services, targeting women as actual wealth controllers. The timing question always shows up, because of course it does. People want to know when to start, as if there is a perfect entry point. The 2009 bottom looks obvious in hindsight. At the time, nobody felt like they were standing on a bottom, just a cliff. The wealth transfer doesn't have a bottom to time. That is the point. It is a 25-year process that already started years ago. The oldest baby boomers are 79 in 2026. The clock is not hypothetical. Transfers are happening right now while people argue about sentiment on social media. Waiting for a better moment just means missing years of compounding, while capital keeps moving. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time, annoyingly, is still today. What strikes me most is how public this all is. The 2009 market bottom was visible to anyone with a brokerage account. The 124 trillion transfer is documented in reports you can literally read. No secret knowledge, no invite, only room, no mysterious code. The difference isn't information access. It is whether anyone actually does anything. The gap between people who benefit and people who don't is simple. It is action. Specifically, one tiny mechanical action repeated every month for 25 years. Open the brokerage account, set up the automatic transfer, first of every month, into an index fund. Nothing fancy, nothing exciting. That is the entire system, and everything else is noise. So here is the question that actually matters. Are you going to set up that transfer this week? Or are you going to spend 6 more months researching the perfect strategy, while the wealth transfer just keeps rolling along without you? Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not a lottery ticket. You're not waking up next Tuesday a millionaire. You don't get 7 figures because you watched a video and nodded. The 124 trillion transfer is not a secret cheat code. It is a slow freight train that either carries you or runs you over. So what does positioning actually look like in real life? It is almost boring, which is why most people ignore it. Max out your 401k if your employer matches. That is free money. That is free dollars sitting on the table while you scroll for the next crypto moonshot. The 2026 limit is 23,500 or 31,000. If you're over 50, if you can't hit the max, hit the match. If you can't hit the match, hit something anything. Open an IRA and automate contributions. Whatever amount doesn't break you. Doesn't matter if it is $50 a month or $500. The point isn't the amount. It is being in the game when the money starts sloshing. Broad market index funds, that is the core. Not individual stocks, not sector bets, not whatever your brother-in-law is pumping on Reddit. Build a cash position, not for emotional safety, for opportunity, because the transfer will create ugly dislocations. Moments when assets get mispriced because someone is forced to sell. If you're sitting on 3 months of expenses in cash, you can actually act. Extend your time horizon, because this is not a quick trade. It is a position that lives across a 25-year transfer window. You're not trying to catch the top or the bottom. You're trying to be present for the middle, where everything compounds. Think about skills that serve money in motion. Estate planning, real estate, financial advising, tax strategy. As 124 trillion changes hands, the people facilitating it will collect the fees. Consider where you live, if you have any real flexibility. Research where wealth is concentrating versus leaking out. Then decide if you want to stay put. Real estate in receiving markets will probably outperform the rest. Have the uncomfortable conversations with family while everyone is still alive. If you're expecting inheritance, understand the timeline and the structure. If you're leaving wealth, make sure the transfer is efficient instead of chaotic. Proper estate planning isn't morbid. It is just practical adulthood. Now, here is the part that actually matters most. You're not trying to predict the future. You're not a prophet. You're trying to build a position that works across multiple futures. If markets go up, you participate. Nothing fancy. If markets correct, you have dry powder to deploy. If your career stalls, you have skills that serve wealth in motion. This is about optionality, not certainty. The people who became millionaires after 2009 weren't geniuses. They were simply positioned when opportunity arrived, while fear kept everyone else on the sidelines. Margaret just noticed that fear had created value, and she acted. The opportunity today is different in mechanism, but similar in scale. The 124 trillion isn't a prediction. It is already in motion. Cerulli Associates documented it. The Federal Reserve tracks it. Nobody is hiding this. The wealth is moving whether you participate or not. History will file this period with the other big wealth events. The post-Civil War industrial expansion, the post-World War II boom, the 1982 to 2000 bull market, the 2009 recovery. Each minted millions of millionaires who just participated in expansion. No insider access, just presence and patience. You now know the scale, you know the timeline. You know the strategies that let regular people actually benefit. What you do with that knowledge decides how you remember this era. Either as the moment everything quietly changed, or the moment you were too distracted to notice. So here is the question I want you to sit with. Not whether you believe the transfer will happen. It is already happening. The real question is whether you'll take the smallest action today. The one that gives you the largest possible optionality tomorrow. Drop a comment and say which one you're committing to this week, not someday this week.